Chapter 5. Have Not. Virginia stood speechless. "He's gone," Ben had said. She opened her mouth to ask questions, but stopped and looked all around. Gosh sat beside the empty cage. Ben stood aimlessly at the door of the shack. She started to say, "Where?" but changed it to "when." Ben shook his head negatively, and Gosh piped, "We don't know." "Did you look all over?" asked Virginia. "Did you search in the brush? Did you look out on the golf course?" "I looked everywhere," Ben said dismally. Gosh helped. "He's gone. He ain't no place," said Gosh. "He never went away before," said Ben. "How'd he get away? How did it happen?" "When I come home," explained Ben. "He was gone. Cage door was open." "Maybe we can follow his tracks," said Virginia. She tried to read the sand, scuffed and kicked into illegibility by the feet of Ben and Gosh, and Heavy and Tex. "No use," said Ben. Gosh opened his mouth to speak, and they waited for him to form the words. "Maybe a hawk got him," he whimpered. "I saw a hawk yesterday." "He never went away before," reiterated Ben. "It's no use." "Not if a hawk got him," mumbled Gosh. He looked up at the sky to see if the hawk might be returning to the scene of the crime. Now that the first shock of the tragedy was over, Virginia resented the attitudes of Gosh and Ben. She was terribly sorry, oh, dreadfully sorry, that something had happened to their cute little Wickie. She wanted so much to help Ben and to set all this to rights, but at the same time she instinctively resented, "Maybe a hawk got him," and Ben's hopeless, "It's no use." That was no way to act. You didn't just stand around and say, "Oh, isn't it awful?" No, you did something. They would never get Wickie back by saying, "It's no use." They'd get him back by searching for him, but doing it in an orderly way, by organizing a searching party. That's what they did when airplanes were lost. There was always a searching party and an investigation. They'd have both, right away too. Why, maybe poor Wickie was hurt someplace, and here they were standing around, saying, "Maybe a hawk got him, and it's no use." "This is awful," said Virginia. "But maybe he's all right, and just got lost, the way children get lost, you know." "He never got lost before," said Ben. "Well, he's lost now," declared Virginia. She tossed the fruit she had been carrying down beside Ben's shack, and she said, "We've got to send out a searching party." Gosh and Ben didn't say anything. Virginia looked at them, and when she saw that they weren't going to answer, she said, "If he's in the brush, we can find him. Gosh, you go down that way and crawl along under the brush between here and your place. Ben can go look the other way up where they went." "Who?" asked Ben. "Those two, Heavy and Tex." She had never called them Heavy and Tex before. It sounded strange, but this was no time to think of that. And look everywhere. Go back and forth, like this. Don't leave any place unlooked at. Gosh stared up at her from his seated position on the sand. "No use," he said. Then he sniffled. "Hawk." "I'll go out toward the golf course." all crawl under the bushes, and all look everywhere. If he's in any of those places, we'll find him, won't we?" "I don't know," said Ben. "Well, let's try," said Virginia. "Get up, Gosh. Ben, you go that way, and whoever finds him must call 'Found,' just as loud as he can." "Found," said Gosh, "even if it's what the hawk left." "Don't look so sad, Ben. He's a smart little rat, isn't he?" "Oh yes, indeedy. He's very smart." "Well, maybe he got stuck under a bush or something. It won't be dark for a long time yet. Let's look everywhere." Gosh got to his feet. "If we can find him," he squeaked, "we can bury him." "We'll find him," said Virginia, "and he won't be hurt a bit. Now look every place carefully. I'm going this way." She walked into the chaparral to the west, pushing her way through the tough scrub oak. The branches snapped against her linen dress, and the twigs caught on her skirt, and it was a great deal more difficult than it looked. She turned and peered back through the brush. Gosh had disappeared, and Ben was following the trail northward, toward the part of the chaparral where Heavy and Tex lived. She turned and stepped forward, bending low and twisting herself around the larger branches, keeping her eyes on the ground and calling softly, "Here, Wiki, here! Wiki, Wiki, Wiki!" The chaparral scratched her arms and her legs, and often she had to protect her face with her hands. Twice she had to crawl on her hands and knees, and once the growth was so thick that she had to wiggle through on her stomach and came up on the other side, with dirt all over her dress. Well, dirt could be brushed off. After every step she would peer around on all sides. Once she found a golf ball. It was an old one with an iron cut. It must have been there a long time. She carried it along with her. It was impossible to examine every square foot of the ground under the chaparral, but it was plain to see that there was no Wiki wherever she looked. She stopped to release her dress from the branch of a thorny scrub, and then pushed on. After a few more steps, she emerged from the tangle of scrub and dwarf oaks at the 7th tee on the golf course. 2 men were on the 6th green a few yards away, and 2 caddies were waiting for them. One of them was round and bald-headed, and wore white knickers and a white sweater, and the other was middle-sized and wore gray pants and a bright green shirt. The round, white one, his back to Virginia, crouched over a putt and tapped the ball, which rolled across the green. Nobody moved, the round man maintaining his crouched position, with his broad white bottom being his most outstanding feature, until the ball dropped into the cup. It had been a long putt, and the fat man was delighted. He cavorted around in a little circle and pretended to poke Green Shirt in the ribs with his putter. Green Shirt wasn't especially pleased. Virginia watched from the 7th tee. It was funny the way grown men got so much fun out of playing with a little white ball. Daddy did too, so it must be all right. One of the caddies held the stick bearing the red flag. He stooped and scooped the ball out of the cup and set the stick back in. Then the 2 men came toward the 7th tee, carrying their drivers. while the two caddies carried the bags containing the other clubs far down the seventh fairway. Green Shirt was handing the fattish one a paper dollar, and as Virginia watched, she recognized the fattish one. It was Mr. Harmon. Both men were mildly surprised to see her standing on the seventh tee. She waited until they came close before she said, "Have you seen anything of a tame rat, Mr. Harmon?" Mr. Harmon looked at her again. "Goodness gracious! Goodness Agnes!" he said, making a funny face. "It's Ed Stewart's little girl." Green Shirt didn't seem to care whose little girl she was. "We lost our rat," explained Virginia, "and I'm looking for him." "Rat," said Mr. Harmon. "Lost a rat?" "Yes, he ran away, and I've looked in the bushes, and he's not there, and Ben doesn't know where he is either. Do you think a hawk got him?" "Did you fall down and hurt yourself?" asked Mr. Harmon. Virginia looked at her dress. There was dirt all over it from wriggling through the chaparral on her stomach, and dirt on her hands and her knees, and although she couldn't see it, a smudge on her forehead. "No, I didn't hurt myself, but we've got to find our rat." "You know Ed Stewart," said Mr. Harmon to Green Shirt. "This is his daughter." "What's he do? Keep her under the barn?" asked Green Shirt. Virginia immediately disliked Green Shirt. "How are your mamma and daddy?" inquired Mr. Harmon. "They're all right," said Virginia. Was there any use in asking Mr. Harmon more about Wiki? No, probably not. "Your Honor, Ralph," said Green Shirt. Mr. Harmon teed his ball and took his stance. "Double or nothing," he said. "Done," Green Shirt said. After a false address, Mr. Harmon set his feet squarely and wiggled his broad bottom, raising the club over his right shoulder. Down it came, so fast you couldn't see it, but you could hear it cut the air and hear the whack. The ball was lost for a moment in the air, but presently landed on the fairway, a long way ahead, where the caddies were waiting. Mr. Harmon was delighted. "That's going to cost you a $2 bill," he chortled. "I'll be on the green in 2. "Oh, I don't know," said Green Shirt, teeing his ball. "Want a side bet on that?" asked Mr. Harmon. "No," said Green Shirt. "My daddy's game is practically professional," said Virginia. "Where did you find that ball?" asked Mr. Harmon. "Back there," said Virginia. "It's no good." She handed it to him. "Silver King," he said. "You can have it." "Daddy uses Wilson's," said Virginia. "He says he gets best results with them." Green Shirt turned from his stance and glared at her. "Quiet," said Mr. Harmon. Green Shirt drove the ball into space. It curved to the right while in the air, and then bounded off the fairway into a sand trap. Mr. Harmon made a funny face, and Green Shirt muttered under his breath. "You slice," said Virginia. Green Shirt gave her a look. "You're a big help," he said. $2 worth, laughed Mr. Harmon. "You're sure you haven't seen my rat?" asked Virginia. "They ought to keep kids off the course," said Green Shirt. "No, no, you don't want to hunt for rats," said Mr. Harmon. "Now, young ladies shouldn't be rolling around in the dirt. You better run home and wipe your nose." "Wha?" gasped Virginia. "Wipe my nose?" The men were ready to leave the tee, but Mr. Harmon had another thought. "Do you know why little pigs eat so much?" he inquired. "You asked me that before," snapped Virginia. "It's because they want to make hogs of themselves." Then you made a face like this. She squinted her eyes and puckered her lips. "That's what you did." "Did I? Well, I hope I never look like that again. Now you better run on home to Mama." "Oh, how revolting. Run on home to Mama. Wipe your nose." Mother, she always called her not Mama. "Oh." Mr. Harmon left the tea, and Green Shirt, following him, said, "Goodbye, Patty Berg." Mr. Harmon walked on down the fairway, and Green Shirt walked off toward the sand traps at the right. There was something about Mr. Harmon that made you want to behave simply awful, yell phooey or something, and that fresh Green Shirt saying she lived under a barn and calling her names. "Dub," she called after Green Shirt, and when he turned to look back, she darted into the chaparral and began to claw her way back, stooping and scratching her hands and shouldering her way through the oak maze. There was no use scrambling through the chaparral any longer. Even if Wiki were in it, he would be as safe as anything, and he'd go home to Ben unless he got confused. No hawk would ever get him in there. Maybe he was home already, while she was twisting through these nasty bushes. Maybe everything was all right after all. She crawled out of the chaparral at Ben's shack. Ben hadn't returned, but Gosh was sitting on the sand, his back against the shack. "Couldn't find him," he said lugubriously. "No use lookin'." Virginia sat down on the sand in front of Gosh. "Maybe he'll come back by himself," she said. "Not if a hawk got him." "Oh no, hawk got him," said Virginia irritably. She examined the scratches on her arms and a rip in one of her socks. She brought her knees up and rubbed the dirt off. "Them. Just look what I did." It was the first time she had ever talked to Gosh, but she took him for granted and paid attention only to rehabilitating her clothes. He watched her, his mouth open slightly. Her spread knees and raised skirt exposed most of her thighs, but she was unaware of Gosh's stare as she rubbed the earth from her kneecaps. "Just look at Paul," said Virginia. "How did you get so dirty? And look at Pauline, she's dirtier yet. Why, you bad Pauline." Gosh didn't understand this conversation with a pair of knees, but he was interested in watching nonetheless. Ben came trudging back. He shook his head sadly. "He's gone," he mumbled. "Maybe he'll come home, Ben." "No," said Ben. "I know he's gone for good." He sat down on the broken chair. Virginia finished brushing herself off. Suddenly she felt as melancholy as Ben. Their search had been a failure. Probably they would never see Wiki again. "Poor little fellow," said Ben. Virginia looked at the empty cage. "Oh, Ben, I think maybe he'll come back somehow." "It'll be dark pretty soon," said Ben, "and he won't be able to find his way back." "If he ain't all tore apart," said Gosh, and ate. Nobody said anything, and a spirit of gloom pervaded the arroyo bottom. Virginia scooped up sand into her palm and let it trickle out between her fingers. The sun began to sink behind Flint Ridge. Gosh and Ben just sat. Nobody knew what to say. and there was nothing anybody could do. They had searched for him, and what could you do after that? Give him up? No, no, not yet. You could still go into the place where you are alone and think about him. He was still there, in that place, all right, and not a scratch on him either, not a whisker touched. And if he met a hawk in that place, the hawk wouldn't hurt him. The hawk would like him, and they would become friends. Why couldn't it be that way? Really be that way? After all, the place where you are alone is all there is, Ben had said. It was the only thing that was really real. Not bushes and trees, and the Santa Fe streamliner. You only thought they were real, but they weren't because nothing was, except the place. And that's where Wiki was right now, in that place. He's all right, Ben, said Virginia suddenly. He shook his head sadly. No, exclaimed Virginia. I see where he is now. He's in the place. Well, said Ben. Hawk's place, said Gosh. No, can't you understand, Ben, said Virginia. It's like the streamliner. He's only lost because we think he's lost. He's not really lost. Well, said Ben doubtfully. Oh, he'll be back, explained Virginia. Why, it's just as easy, can't you see, Ben? If you just know he's coming back. But he'll be back. Why, I bet he comes home tonight. No, whined Gosh. He's been ate. All blood and bones. Virginia didn't listen. She jumped up. Oh, Ben, I'm so glad he's all right. You'll see. If he comes home tonight, Ben, will you let me know some way? Well, said Ben, I'm afraid we'll never see him again, Virginia. But he's part my rat, insisted Virginia. And if he comes home, I have a right to know, haven't I, Ben? He'll be home, all right. Yes, indeedy. So, will you tell me? How can I? Asked Ben. My room is the back room upstairs. If you gave a whistle from the top of the trail, I could hear it. Then I'd know he was back, and everything was all right. Will you do that, Ben? Yes, indeedy, said Ben. If he comes home, I'll come up and whistle 3 whistles, so you can hear it, like this. He whistled 3 notes of a scale, the first 3 notes of the melody over there. I'll keep the door open onto my balcony, said Virginia. I'll be sure to hear it then. She noted the lengthening shadows. Here's a golf ball I found. Want it, Gosh? Gosh nodded. She tossed it, and he caught it, and dropped it, and examined it. No good, he said forlornly. It's cut, see? Then save it for Wiki. He can have fun with it. Don't forget to whistle, Ben. Good night. She turned and skipped along the trail. She went up the path in long strides, singing under her breath, I have a little rat with a funny little hat, and he's coming home tonight. Machiavellian ideology, he's coming home tonight. In her house, Virginia went to her room and took off her dress. It was best to change it so that Mother wouldn't ask too many questions. She washed her hands and face. That old Mr. Harmon, what's he know about anything? And put on a white midi blouse and a pleated navy blue shirt. Later, Mother remembered that she had left the house for school in the morning, wearing a pink and white linen, and she inquired about the change. I fell down, Virginia explained. Did you hurt yourself? Oh no, not at all, not a bit. Where did you fall? In the schoolyard? No, not there. On the street? No, near it. Near what? Near the schoolyard. Mother, if a person had a pet rat and it got lost, it would come home again, wouldn't it? Goodness, do they ask you things like that in school? No. Well, who has a pet rat? That's right. Mother couldn't know anything about this. Be careful. Oh, you have, said Virginia. What? Yes, I'm a rat. I scamper all over you. See? She ran her fingers up and down Mother's arms. Virginia, what are you doing? I have side whiskers like this, and I gnaw things like this. Look, Mother, gnaw, gnaw. Just what is all this rat talk? Asked Mother, perplexed. Be careful, watch out. Is it nature study in school? Asked Mother. It could be, couldn't it? Sometimes we study animals, said Virginia. It was getting too close for comfort. Better change it. What's Machiavellian ideology mean? Asked Virginia. For he's coming home tonight. Oh goodness, said Mother. You better look those words up in the dictionary. That's better. All right, I'll go do it, said Virginia. She skipped out of the room. This was one of the nights that Mother and Daddy went out after dinner, and Virginia spent the hour from 8 to 9 in her room, and Celia came up to keep her company. It proved to be a difficult hour for Celia. She found it impossible to take part in a conversation that had predominantly to do with rats, and to make it physically uncomfortable. Virginia insisted that it was hot in the room, and had to have the door open onto the balcony that overlooked the garden. And not only that, but she insisted upon going out on the balcony every few minutes. Celia breathed a sigh of relief at 9 o'clock. The routine protestations about bed and the delays occasioned by getting undressed consumed another 15 minutes. But at last Celia was able to turn out the light and escape downstairs, where she could turn on the radio and listen to a talk on the forces of light by an accredited representative of the Ascended Master, Saint Germain. Only recently had she forsaken the evangelicalisms of Aimee Semple McPherson and thrown her allegiance to the more fantastic church of the I Am. The old and familiar hymns were missing, but the fact that through your very body the masters were about to requalify the whole world gave you a feeling of responsibility that even battling Aimee's arch-enemy, satanic iniquity, hardly equaled. At this very instant, by keeping dynamic and allowing the masters to work through her, she was saving the peace of Europe, relieving the worries of millions, and lending a helping hand to the universal routing of all human misery. And it was a titillating thrill to the ego. The old-time religion was still a fine thing, but to be in the know with an ascended master, well, not everybody accomplished that. About 10:30, she retired to her own room off the kitchen. Had she by chance been prompted to take a stroll into the garden before retiring, she would doubtless have been startled and perhaps frightened by a figure clothed in ghostly white, which stood on the balcony, and a recent lecture on the I Am Presence would have at once associated itself with this ghostly wraith lurking over her bedroom window, and she would have known that Saint Germain had singled her out, until the figure would become Virginia in her white nightgown, standing on the balcony in the night air, defying pneumonia and not knowing it, and would return inside only when confronted with the dire threats of what would happen should Celia tell her mother. But Celia did not take any unprecedented night stroll in the garden, and the figure in the white nightgown stayed too long on the balcony and did not retire inside until her skin was goose flesh and she had a chill. Shivering, she crawled back into bed. There had been no signal. Of that she was sure. Wiki had not come home. What had gone wrong? Why hadn't it worked when, in that place where she was alone, it was bound to work? Could Ben and Gosh be right? A hawk after all? No, it couldn't be that way. She wouldn't have it that way. He was so coming home. She would lie here in bed and think hard about it. Nothing else was really real. By noon the next day she was sniffling and sneezing, but she thought nothing of it. During the arithmetic class, she was given the problem. If A can do twice as much work in 1 hour as B, and B can do 1/3 as much more in 1 hour than C, how long will C have to work to accomplish what A can do in 3.5 hours? It was a problem of fractions, and easy enough if you understood reducing to a common denominator. She immediately put it in thirds and sixths, and computed the answer. The interesting thing was not the answer, which was 10 hours and 30 minutes, but the fact that strong husky A was heavy. Average working B was of course Ben, and poor little C was Gosh. You could hardly expect Gosh to keep up with heavy. After school, still sniffling, she rode home on the street car, with its rattle-clink-clink, and she thought of the first time she had ever seen Ben and Wiki. They had seemed so strange, and now they were her best friends, and she was in a terrible hurry to get home, and then down to the arroyo bottom, to see if Wiki had been found. She tossed 2 school books inside the kitchen door, and went at once to the arroyo edge. Mother's coupe wasn't in the garage, which meant that Mother was out. That helped. She hopped down the trail and hurried along through the chaparral, and when she came to Gosh's house, she saw a stranger, a man of middle size in a worn-out brown suit, who had been standing perfectly still, staring at Gosh's shack. He turned and stared at her. He didn't belong in the arroyo, and she passed on, putting him out of her mind at once. Ben was there, and Gosh, and she could tell without asking that Wiki had not returned. Ben was at work on some kind of gadget. "Hello, Virginia," he said. Gosh peered up at her. "What are you making?" she asked. "Don't rightly know," Ben said. Virginia saw that Ben had taken apart the wire treadmill that used to spin inside Wiki's cage. "Might make a grill out of it." "A grill?" "To cook on, like when you broil something." "Oh." She squatted down in order to see better. "He never come home," said Gosh sadly. "Or I might make something else out of it," said Ben. "Can't say yet." "He's good and dead now," whined Gosh. You could make one of those wire things that hold flowers, suggested Virginia. All chewed to pieces, said Gosh. Yeah, I could, said Ben. In some hawk's belly, said Gosh. Or you could make a waste basket out of it, you know, the wire kind. Yes, indeedy, said Ben. Tore apart and ate alive, said Gosh, head and all. Oh, stop that, said Virginia sharply. Gosh looked surprised. You mustn't talk like that, said Virginia. That spoils it. Spoils it, said Gosh. That's not the way it is. But Ben thinks he's dead, mumbled Gosh. Dead and ate. Well, I don't think he's dead and ate. So there, said Virginia. All three looked up as the stranger, in the shabby brown suit, came along the trail. He paused and looked at the group. Ben sitting on the wobbly chair, Virginia sitting on the sand, and Gosh sprawled on his side. For a moment nobody spoke, and then the stranger said, "Hello, men." Ben nodded slightly, and Gosh stared open-mouthed, and Virginia squirmed around in order to see better. The stranger walked on, passing north along the trail in the direction of the domicile of Heavy and Tex. He took his time, and he seemed to be looking around carefully. Virginia inhaled deeply, her face contorting, and exhaled at once with a sneeze. "You know what we ought to have?" asked Gosh. "What?" asked Virginia. He opened his mouth, but the word wasn't there. "What?" insisted Virginia. "The funeral," he whispered. "Do you think so, too, Ben?" "Well," said Ben, "he was a nice little fella." Virginia considered it. "It would be something to do, wouldn't it? Sort of a game, I mean. I could be Forest Lawn Cemetery, and you could telephone me at the time of sorrow." "We could make a grave," said Gosh, "like he was in it. One telephone call does everything. That's what the ad says. Ben, have you seen them?" "I reckon not," said Ben. "We'll make the cemetery over there by The sentence was lost in a sneeze. "We'll have mourners and pallbearers and everything," she explained, rubbing her nose and breathing through her mouth. "Virginia catched cold," said Ben. "That's too bad. I'll be the Bible. Gosh can be the coffin. Ben can be the family." She shivered. "We oughta have sad music," said Gosh. "They always have sad music." "No," said Virginia abruptly. "We can't do it after all. It isn't right." "No sad music?" asked Gosh. "No funeral at all," said Virginia. "That's not the way it is. He's not really dead. We can't play that." "Too bad," muttered Gosh. He lay on his stomach on the sand in front of her. Part of the time she sat with her legs flat, but part of the time she sat with her knees raised, and when that happened, Gosh liked to look. But why not play funeral? Why not give up and admit that he was dead? She shivered. "No use trying to fool yourself, is there? It's kind of cold down here," she said. "You ought to drink some hot lemonade for that cold," said Ben. "Will that fix it?" "Some," said Ben. "You ought to lie down and rest too." "Maybe I will. I don't feel so good." First hot and then cold. She stood up. Gosh watched. "What does your mother do when you have a cold?" asked Ben. "She gives me something for it. Something with a long name. I forgot what it is." "Well, if I was you," said Ben, "I'd go up to my house and get some of it right away." "Maybe I will. I'll come right back." "That's right," said Ben. The two men watched her go. "If she was my little girl," said Ben, "I'd watch out for that cold." Gosh said nothing. He lay face down in the soft sand and closed his eyes. When Celia was asked for lemonade, she refused to take the request seriously. "Spoil your dinner," she said. Virginia didn't answer. Somehow it wasn't worth arguing with Celia. She found Mother at home, and she sat down beside her in the library. She didn't have to tell Mother that she didn't feel well. Mother knew it at once. And after a sniffle and a sneeze, Mother took full charge. Virginia had to show her tongue and have her pulse felt, and have her temperature taken with the little thermometer, which was kept in the medicine closet in Mother's bathroom. And within 2 minutes her clothes were off and her nightgown was on, and she was in bed with an extra eider down, and Celia had to come up with the hot lemonade after all. Sometimes it was fun being sick, because you were the center of all attention, and the whole house was at your beck and call. But not this time. It felt good to be in bed, and she lay still and stared up at the ceiling. Poor Ben and Gosh, they had no warm room, and no comfortable bed, and nobody to look after them when they were sick. And poor little Wicky, lost forever, maybe, eaten by a hawk after all, maybe. To be eaten alive. Ugh, how horrible. She turned on her side and buried her head in the pillow. Life was sad sometimes, sad, sad, and poor Ben grieving for little Wicky. Right this minute he was waiting for his little rat to come home, and he was never coming home. It made a place feel hollow way inside you, and there was a lump in your throat that you tried to swallow, only the lump got bigger, and your eyes got misty, and made the pillow damp, and you caught your breath. Then Mother asked if you felt worse, and you said, "No," but when you said it, the word got lost in a sob. Mother was awfully kind and nice and loving, but she couldn't understand that what you were crying about was a poor little rat who was half your rat, and who got lost and hurt and died all by himself away from you and Ben, who loved him. Every other time in her life, when something terrible and serious had happened, she had been able to tell Mother, but now Mother wouldn't understand about Wicky. It was something you had to suffer all by yourself. When Daddy came home he took her temperature, and he said she didn't have any fever, just a head cold, and that they wouldn't send for the doctor unless she got worse. Mother didn't seem to be so sure, and when they went down to dinner they were still talking about it. By keeping very still, so that the pillow didn't crinkle under your ear, you could hear them talking at dinner, just the sound of voices way off, coming through the darkness, no words at all, and at times you could hear the more positive clatter of a knife or a fork on a plate, but even that too was way off. And then, as she lay still from somewhere equally far away, but so plain that you couldn't mistake it, came the 3 whistled notes, E-G-C, over there, the signal. Just once it came, and she raised up in bed with a start. Then she sat still waiting, afraid to move for fear of blotting out any repetition. She couldn't have imagined it. It was too plain for that. And now silence. Cautiously she put one foot out of bed, then another. Holding her breath, she slipped from the covers and stood beside the bed. She turned and began to tiptoe in long strides toward the door, which led out onto the balcony. Then, before she reached the door, it came again, plainer than before. Absolutely no room for doubt. Over there, Wiki was home. There was no other meaning. Wiki was home, and Ben had told her so, just as he promised to do. In her excitement, she abandoned caution, forgot to tiptoe, and started to open the door onto the balcony. For one instant, she enjoyed the ecstasy of sheer delight, unrepressed, uninhibited celebration, comparable to an armistice night or a New Year's Eve. She wouldn't have been at all surprised to hear distant bells, chimes, shots, and whistles. Found, found, found. In her joy she turned from the door to the balcony and hurried back to bed, for Mother had heard her moving about, and Mother was halfway up the stairs. But it was all right. Nothing mattered now. She could explain somehow to Mother. And she did by saying she had gotten up to go to the bathroom, and Mother seemed to believe it, and tucked her in bed again. And she insisted to Mother that she felt better, much better. Oh, so much better. And after a minute, Mother went downstairs to finish her dinner. Virginia could hear her talking to Daddy, but she couldn't make out the words. "She's so volatile," said Mother. "An hour ago she was a sick girl, and now she seems perfectly all right." "Nervous temperament," said Daddy. "Nervous exhaustion, I think," said Mother. "She works hard at her lessons and gets excellent grades. Perhaps she overdoes it without realizing it. At any rate, I'm going to keep her in bed for a few days." Upstairs, Virginia lay in the darkness and forgot that she ever had a cold. She relaxed, enjoying the full meaning of that signal. He wasn't dead. He had never been dead, and she had known it from the start, in that place where you are alone. Ecstasy graduated to an enduring rapture, and after some time she slept. It was Friday night when Ben whistled the signal that Wiki had come home, but it was not until the following Tuesday that Virginia was able to get down to the Arroyo bottom and rejoice with Ben over the reunion. Mother kept her in bed Saturday and Sunday, and even though her cold had gone, except for a slight hoarseness, Mother wanted her to stay home from school on Monday. During those 3 days, great changes occurred in the chaparral. Dean arrived. On Sunday afternoon, Virginia got out of bed, and Mother let her sit on the balcony overlooking the garden. It was warm and sunny, and the fresh air was pleasant. She sat and read Ferdinand the Bull and Voldemar the Dachshund and Swiss Family Robinson. This last reminded her of Ben and the Arroyo, and from time to time she kept an eye on the path across the lot, which Ben used in coming to and from the trail to the bottom. But Ben was not to be seen, nor were Gosh or Heavy or Tex. One man did pass across the lot twice, however, but he didn't belong to the Arroyo. He was the stranger in the worn-out brown suit, and she remembered that he had been prowling around down there the other day. He was of no interest at all. She went on with her book. Ben couldn't say who discovered that the stranger's name was Dean, but somebody must have heard it because that was his name all right. He wasn't a big fellow like Heavy. He was only 5'10", if quite that, and he spoke crisply but quietly. He had dark hair and dark eyes. Unlike most of the fraternity, he contrived to shave almost every day, though his clothes were not much better than the misfit garments of the others. Well, yes, they were a bit perhaps, when you looked twice. Dean had a saturnine, almost sullen countenance, and nobody ever saw him smile. He wasn't young, and he wasn't old, but his bronzed, raptorial face was definitely lined. Sometimes he used words which Gosh and Heavy didn't understand, and of which Ben had only a foggy notion, words like National Socialism and state ownership of the means of production, and class war and dictatorship of the asses and masses. And once he told the men they were the army of the have-nots. Heavy said, "That's us," and Tex said, "You're tellin' me," while Ben said, "It's how you look at it," and Gosh scratched his head and didn't even say gosh. Dean asked a number of questions about the arroyo, how long they had all been here, and if there had been any trouble about it, and who else came around, and one or two other questions, which nobody could answer. They sprawled on the sandy area in front of Ben's shack late Monday afternoon, and Dean said, "It looks like a pretty good chance." "What for?" asked Heavy. "To make it work," said Dean. "Make what work?" asked Tex. "The future," said Dean. "Gosh," said Gosh. "What's eatin' you?" asked Tex. "Look here," said Dean. "How many you men communist?" Nobody acquiesced. "How many fascist?" No response. "That's what I thought," said Dean. "You're just like me." "What are you?" asked Tex. "I'm 100% American," said Dean, "and I got my own system. There's good ideas in all systems, but nobody has thought of the one system that takes all the good ideas and puts them under one head. I've had a lot of time to sit and do some thinkin' lately, and I saw the future." "Where was you sittin'?" asked Heavy. "Durantsville," said Dean. "Whatville?" asked Heavy. "In Stir," said Dean. "Oh," said Heavy. "What jug?" asked Tex. "Florence, Arizona." "What racket?" asked Tex. "None of your business," said Dean. "Okay," said Tex. "When a man asks himself why he has to sit in one place for 2 years, if he's got any brains, he finds the answer. I found it." "What was it?" asked Tex. "What makes a man break the law?" asked Dean. "Want, hunger, necessity. A yen to cotton on to the things that naturally belong to every man, but which the system won't let any but the rich man have. It ain't the men inside the walls that's wrong. No, it's the system that put 'em there. So the system's got to go." "Outta stuff," said Tex. "Where to?" asked Heavy. "Hell," said Dean. "Gosh," said Gosh. "And in place of the old way, we'll have the new way. And if there's some people who don't like it, they can shut up or get out. I don't want no foreigners in this, and I'm against Catholics, Jews, coons, and tycoons of all kinds. Nothing but 100% white Americans like us here. Then we vote for national social legislation, which means that we socialize everything that every man has got to have. What's socialize mean? Asked Tex. Means it belongs to everybody, share and share alike. Out of stuff, said Tex. I'm for it. We socialize all wealth, food, clothes, houses, maybe even automobiles. I'll figure that out later. A car for every guy? Asked Tex. Maybe. Oh boy, said Tex. Why, hell, that won't work, said Heavy. I'll take a white Rolls-Royce, said Tex. Can't you see me burning up the highway? Beep, beep. Look out. Dames, here I come. He steered his imaginary car, running it over Gosh and pushing him aside. Beep, beep. Out of my way, dimwit. I'm in the dough. Dean was staring at Heavy. Be careful about saying it won't work, he warned. We kick guys like that out with the coons and the kikes. Beep, beep, said Tex. Here I come, fellows. Tell us some more, Dean. All the men that are in jails get let out. All the rich birds get put in, unless they give up their money to the state. Making too much money will be a crime. The first guy that does it, zip. He made a gesture of slitting his throat. So the 100% American state will own everything. Factories, farms, utilities, booze, the army, the navy, the press, houses, land. Movies? Asked Tex. Sure, movies. Burly Q shows. Everything government owned. Oh, nuts, said Heavy. Except maybe about $5,000 a year, which everybody gets over 21. I'll be 21 next year, said Tex. Hot damn. We'll pass a law to blow up the stock market, and maybe Henry Ford and the Standard Oil Company with it. Niggers and Japs and Reds get run out of the country, and we'll send all the Catholics to Italy and all the Jews to Germany. Beep, beep, said Tex. Red light says stop. All red light districts will be free, continued Dean, and good whiskey will be 50 cents a pint. Lead me to it, said Tex. Lot of crap, said Heavy. A little fellow like Gosh here, said Dean, has been starved by rich bastards. He was probably a full-sized man before the Depression. Me, said Gosh. But the tycoons shrunk him down to half-pint size, and all he has to eat is used golf balls. You're as funny as a crutch, growled Heavy. And even though this big ape don't like it, continued Dean, the future's not so far removed as it seems, and it ain't gonna be far from, like I said, impossible as it may sound today. I've seen free and white Americans pawing over the city dump at Sacramento, the capital of this state, trying to find a little garbage to eat. I've seen American children starving for orange juice, while the oranges rot on the ground because it don't pay the tycoons to harvest 'em. But they'd rather let 'em rot than give 'em to a starving kitty. A Jew movie tycoon makes over $1 million a year income, and I've seen 17-year-old girls walking the streets for 25 cents. I've seen young men go to jail because they were so hungry they went out and took the food nature meant 'em to have. And now state and federal governments got to build new jails because there's more pouring into them than goes out. All that's the result of the old way. I've seen it in California. I've seen it in South Carolina. I've seen it in Cleveland and Detroit and Chicago. Patching up the old way won't work. We got to cut this economic cancer out of society and start over. Organize all men according to what they can do. That's the mass. Let the best ones be the leaders. Then there's got to be one leader who's the head of the whole works. But he's only the servant of the state, and the state is everybody. I'm no red. I'm no brown shirt or black shirt. But I say every free and white American has a right to live, and live decent. And this USA is rich enough just the way it stands today, so that every 100% American could have enough to eat, and a house to live in, and clothes on his back, and a little money in his pocket. Yes, every one of us right here, and in your skulls maybe you think I'm crazy and a bag of wind, and if you think that, I'm satisfied, because if you think that you'll challenge me, and that's all I want, some bird that'll challenge me and say, it can't be done, and then I'll show you whether it can be done or not. Yes, and done right here in this arroyo. We can start the whole thing right here, and now men, right here and now. The hell you can, said Heavy. There, hear that, men, it can't be done, he says. Challenges 100% Americanism, he does, and tries to stop progress. Let's make an issue out of it, men. Let's come to the point right now. This is the acid test. Let's bring the future to the present. Shoot the works, Dean, said Tex. Dean got up and paced back and forth, thrusting his arguments and his logic upon each member of the audience in turn. This arroyo don't belong to us separately, he told them all. Private property don't exist down here. This is the future comin' right into your laps, men. Yours and yours and yours and yours. And why ain't there no private property down here no more? Because from now on it belongs to all of us together, provided, of course, we have the good sense to vote it that way, 'cause you never can do anything without votin' on it first. Otherwise it wouldn't be 100% American. Majority rules. Liberty or death. Ain't that so, men? Dern tootin', agreed Tex. Gosh and Ben sat staring at Dean, and Heavy sneered in unconcealed disgust. Pershing square politician, he said, sellin' corn plasters. So you can't fence off a part of this land and keep it for yourself, Dean told Ben. That's the old way. We're gonna run this new way. Nobody gets more than anybody else, he informed Gosh. If one eats, we all eat, he told Tex, and to Heavy he said, because there's none so dumb as those who will not see, and to the group in general he declared, the old way didn't have any system, but the new way takes care of all of us. Everybody understand. What's wrong with things the way they are now? Asked Heavy. It was all right until you begun bellyachin'. No planning, said Dean. Under the old way, you couldn't tell what'd happen next. Maybe you'd go hungry and cold. Maybe one fellow had enough to live on for a week, and nobody else had anything. Them days is gone forever. Who says so? Asked Heavy. I say so, said Dean. Oh, yes, said Heavy. Yes, said Dean. What do you think you are? The big cheese, asked Heavy. Now listen, men, said Dean, dropping his oratory to an intimate and grave persuasiveness. The old way he enumerated on his fingers: starvation, insecurity, cold. Watch your step, cheat your best friend, gut your own brother, spit on by the tycoons, scum of the earth. How do you like it? Before they could answer, he raised his voice to powerful assertion with, "But from now on, that is gone forever. And now we're going to have peace and prosperity, good eats, no work, live in clover, take life easy, gin and beer, and a woman when you want her, share and share alike, 100% Americanism. Now what do you want, men? The old way or the new way?" "The new way," yelled Tex. "Crap and applesauce," said Heavy. "You make me puke." "All right, men, it's an issue," fired Dean, "and there's only one way to decide it. We'll put it to a vote. From now on, life in this arroyo goes forward or backward. There's no middle course. We got to have the old way or the new way. We'll put it squarely up to the people. We'll take a vote on it right here and now. The votin's open, men, and I'm castin' the first vote for the new way. That makes one." He turned on Tex. "Which way you votin', kid?" "Me? Well," Tex considered. "I'll try anything once, so—" "That's 2 votes for the new way," said Dean. "Yes, 2. No, none." "I'm votin' no," said Heavy. "I'm against it." 2 to 1 in favor of it," said Dean. "How you votin', little fellow?" he asked Gosh. "You want to eat or you want to starve?" "Gosh, I want to eat. Yes or no?" "Yes," piped Gosh. 3 to 1 for the new way," said Dean. "Wait a minute," growled Heavy. "Don't butt in on an election," said Dean. "How about you, old guy? New or old?" "Well," said Ben, "I ain't at all sure." "Why not?" asked Dean. "Just ain't. You got to vote yes or no," commanded Dean. "Leave him talk," said Heavy. "Well, I ain't at all sure," said Ben. "I don't know." "I declines to vote," said Dean. "Election's over. Yes, 3 no, 1 declines to vote. 1. New ways carried 3 to 1. Congratulations, men." "Gosh," said Gosh. "You can't get away with that stuff here," said Heavy. "Listen, you," said Dean calmly. "Ever hear about the guy in a cell rattling on the bars and yelling, 'You can't put me in jail'? Well, where is he? He's in jail, ain't he?" "So what?" said Heavy. "Then don't tell me I can't get away with this stuff here. It's already done. These men voted fairly and squarely, and you heard every one of 'em. They voted for the new way, 3 to 1. That's a pretty big majority. You're the only one against it. If you don't like the way we run this place, you can get out." "There's something phony about this," said Heavy. "Who the hell told you to come bustin' in here talkin' new way stuff, and actin' like you was?" "Listen," said Dean. "We're startin' a system here for the good of everybody in it. It's passed by a majority. The men want it. And by God, if you try to hold this system back, and try to bust up what the majority wants, we'll kick your fat ass the hell out. Just because you're a big fellow, don't think these men are afraid of you. It's the system we're working for, and by God, we won't let any man stop it. Will we, men?" "No," said Tex. He's the kind of a guy that would take the bread out of your mouth, said Dean, pointing a tanned finger at Heavy. They all looked at Heavy with interest and surprise. What the hell, said Heavy, I ain't. Don't listen to him, men, said Dean. What's he against the plan for? I tell you, because he's got more than any of the rest of us, and he's trying to hold out on us. We already voted him down, and he's still trying to make trouble. Say, you holdin' out on us, Heavy? Asked Tex. He's crazy, declared Heavy. Crazy am I, said Dean. We're not going to stand much more from you. He turned to Tex. Kid, I'm going to appoint you second in command of this arroyo. Me, said Tex. Want me to appoint somebody else? No, said Tex. What do I do? Collect all the grub, and we'll have a feed. Everybody's got to put in something. You see to it that everybody puts in a fair and equal amount. We'll cook it here and eat it. Don't matter if it ain't a big feed tonight. This is just a starter. Tomorrow we'll really go places. Okay, Dean, said Tex. He turned to Gosh. What have you got? He demanded. Me, asked Gosh. Yes, you, said Tex, belligerently. You heard what Dean said, didn't you? Gosh, yes. What have you got? I got a loaf of bread, said Gosh timidly. Part of a loaf, that is. Anything else? Some dried beans. Go get 'em and be quick about it, said Tex. Scram. Gosh got up and went down the trail toward his shack. Beans and bread comin' up, reported Tex to Dean. He raised his hand in a gesture of an abortive salute. Okay, said Dean, relaxing on the sand and chewing on a leaf he had pulled from an adjacent bush. Christ, snorted Heavy in disgust. Dean ignored him. What have you got? Demanded Tex of Ben. Well, said Ben, I was figurin' on eatin' a can of tomatoes myself. What else? I got 2 grapefruit. Bring it out, commanded Tex. Tomatoes and grapefruit, he called to Dean, who had heard the whole thing. Hot damn, are we gettin' somewhere? He spat a gob of blood. Dean lay still and chewed on the leaf. You comin' in on this, Heavy? Asked Tex. You know I ain't, said Heavy. Tex hesitated. You gotta, he finally said. Heavy stood up. Dean turned on his side and looked at him. Heavy spoke to the group in general. I'm going up to my shack, he said. I got some salt pork and bread and coffee, and I'm gonna eat it, and you can all go to hell. He turned and walked up the trail and disappeared in the chaparral. Tex looked blankly at Dean. Ain't part of his stuff yours? Asked Dean. Half of it, said Tex. Go get your half and bring it down here, said Dean. That's fair. Okay, said Tex. He walked up the trail after Heavy. Ben said, I got to feed Wiki. I got some old bread left over for him. Dean said nothing. Ben got up and went into his shack. The rat was inside in its cage. While Ben was busy, Gosh returned with his half a loaf of bread and dried beans. He put them down beside the fire pit and sat down and looked at Dean. Dean nodded silently, without speaking. It was beginning to get dark. The 2 men sat waiting in the twilight. Ben came out again. Dean said, I don't know about that rat. We may have to get rid of it. What for? Asked Ben. It don't produce, said Dean. Tex came back shortly after that. "I got some coffee," he said. "Heavy give me part of it, but he kept the salt pork. He's sore, Dean. I thought he was gonna sock me." Dean sat up and spat out the chewed remains of the leaf. He looked over the supply of food. "It's working pretty good," he said with quiet satisfaction. "Now you guys stir up a fire and heat the tomatoes and make some coffee and divide up the bread in 4 parts. I'll be back in a couple of minutes." He walked off into the chaparral. Gosh got the wood. Ben opened the can of tomatoes. Tex divided the bread and struck a match for the fire. They made coffee in a can. Everything was coming along all right. It was almost entirely dark when Dean returned. He had something in each hand. "What have you got, Dean?" asked Tex. "The salt pork," said Dean, tossing it down. "Fry it." "What's in your other hand?" Dean displayed the object for only a second. "Blackjack," he said quietly, and he put it inside his coat. "Woo," said Tex. "What's holding us up?" asked Dean. "Nothin'. Let's eat," said Tex. Usurpation occurred on Monday night and Tuesday afternoon. Virginia made her belated visit to the arroyo. She hurried through the brush as one who has been long abroad and is searching for familiar scenes as she nears her native strand. There was Gosh's house. It looked just the same. There was where the trail curved, and there was Ben's house, and there was Ben. He looked up, and he saw her coming. "Ben, Ben," she shouted. "Hello, Ben." He smiled a broad smile, and held his arms wide in a gesture of amazement. "Well, well," he said. "Well, well, well. I thought Virginia had gone and left me." She ran up to him, and there was an awkward moment, when their glee was tempered by self-consciousness. For one instant it had appeared that she might run into his arms, but she stopped in front of him and smiled up at his face, and he smiled down. In the silence he almost touched her, and she almost touched him. Then they both spoke at once. "I brought a can of peas," she said, "and I allowed you was away some place," he said. He patted her shoulder, and she handed him the can of peas. "He come home that night, Virginia," said Ben. "I heard your whistle. I heard it both times." "He's in the house," said Ben. "Come in and see." They walked into the shack, and there was Wiki in the cage, and no sooner were they beside the cage than he began to run on the treadmill. "Oh, such a bad Wiki," said Virginia. "To run away and scare us half to death. Where was he, Ben? Where'd he come from?" "Don't rightly know," said Ben. "I was a-settin' out there in the dark, feelin' like I lost my best friend, and first I heard somethin', but I didn't think nothin' of it, 'cause I counted him dead and gone, and then I'll be switched if I didn't see somethin' movin' in the dark, in the night time. Sounds funny, but even if it was good and dark, I could see 'em a-comin' home along the bushes way. Oh, 'bout a couple of feet from me, kinda sneakin' home easy like, knowin' he'd been a bad boy to run off like he done, and he pops right up into my lap, and I'm so pleased to see him, I got to pinch myself to be sure I'm awake. Oh, Ben, Ben, wasn't that fine?" Virginia jumped up and down and clapped her hands. "So I says, right into your cage for you, and you can just stay there for a spell. And I put him in the cage, and I felt kinda good about everything, and I kinda wanted to give thanks somehow. So I walked up the trail and stood right there by your garden, and I give those 3 whistles, toot toot toot, like we said, and I heard 'em, Ben, and I was sick, Ben, too. I was sick in bed with a cold, but I heard 'em just as plain. Twice I done it, and then I figured I better not go on making noises like that, so I come back down here, allowin' as how you must catched on if you was in. I knew right away what it meant, Ben. Then I got to feelin' pretty sad again the next few days because Virginia never come back, and Wicky and me decided maybe Virginia didn't love us no more. Oh yes I do, Ben. It was only because I was sick, and I couldn't get here until today. But now everything's all right again. Well, almost, said Ben. What's wrong? Why isn't it all right? Ben took Wicky out of the cage and handed him to Virginia. She carried the rat outside, and Ben followed her. It's just that things is a little different, he said. I don't see any difference. What does he get for his supper tonight? Here's some stale bread. You feed him. Why, there's a new fellow here, and he's kinda in the front of things. Oh, she sat down on the sand and put the rat in her lap. Well, we don't care as long as he doesn't bother us. That's just the point, explained Ben, looking around cautiously. He's one of them fellows that's dead set in his ways. He figures that this here is his arroyo to take charge of. Name's Dean. Old Man Dean, crazy in the bean, sang Virginia. We don't care about him, do we, Wicky? Ben looked around again. He's right peculiar, he added. He ain't old, and you must let him hear you call him crazy. He'd act up if he heard that, 'cause maybe he is crazy. Oh, pooh, said Virginia. Well, tell Heavy to make him mind. Him and Heavy don't get along. They had a argument already. That's good. Heavy lost. Virginia looked up at Ben. Ben, are you scared of something? Well, no. Then let's talk the way we used to. All right. Have you made anything new while I was away? No, I put that treadmill together when he come home so he could run again. I saw it. He never meant to stay away so long, did you, Wicky? Dean don't like him, said Ben. Well, we don't like old Dean, so there. Ben looked around the clearing. What else did you do while I was away, Ben? Well, nothin' really, Virginia. I allowed, as how it's gettin' on into October, that maybe it'll be gettin' chilly on the Pacific slope, and if it got too chilly, I might take a walk over to Arizona. Oh, Ben, you're not going away, are you? It's always warm around Phoenix. I been there before. Why, Ben, when everything is so nice here? Ben looked down at his shoes and rubbed one against the other. I don't really want to go, he said. Not really. I'll bring you one of Daddy's old overcoats. Then you'll be warm enough. Oh, it ain't that I need a... Ben, Virginia interrupted. "Have you used the razor set?" "Oh, well, you see, Virginia, Oh, Ben, you've never used it. I bet you shaved with your old worn-out razor." "Virginia, that set is so pretty, I just can't make up my mind to dirty it up. It's been used before, it's not new." "Yes, and some day your daddy is gonna want it again. And then what's gonna happen?" "Oh, don't be silly. If Daddy knew you, he'd give it to you himself. I think I'll bring a lot of things down here. You ought to have a radio, and an electric heater, and some books to read, and magazines and clothes. We can have a lot of fun fixing everything the way it should be. If I could find some way of bringing the playhouse down from the garden, I'd have my own house down here then. Wouldn't that be grand? I'd put it right next to your house." "That'd be right nice," agreed Ben. "And I could cook for you. It'd be just like Merry Sunshine. I reckon when you're growed up, you'll be every bit as fine a woman as Merry Sunshine, every bit." "But you said she was the best woman in the world. And I say you're the best little girl in the world, barring none." "Not even one. Not even one." "Oh, Ben, I didn't know you liked me that much. I like you that much, too. Why, if I had a little girl, I'd 'a' wanted her just like you. No difference. Not the tiniest bit of difference. Oh, Ben, isn't it nice that we like each other so much?" "Yes, indeedy, it's just right." "Then nothing's different, is it?" "How do you mean?" asked Ben. "Well, for a while today, it seemed as if things had gotten different. But that's not so, except that they're better. It's just that we love each other, Ben." "I reckon we do," said Ben. "And I'm Merry Sunshine. Only I won't throw my dress in the fire and go around without any clothes on. That wouldn't be nice." "Oh, no," said Ben, "that ain't for you. And I'm not going to the bug house either." "I reckon not," said Ben. "But we can play bug house, though. Look, Ben, the bug house will be over there. I'll escape from it, and you'll be away someplace. And when you come back, I'll be cooking your supper." "Think that's a good game?" asked Ben. "Sure it is. And Wicky can be in it, too. Sort of as if he was our child. Won't that be fun? First you've got to get a fire started, and open the can of peas I brought, and I'll cook them over the fire when I'm Merry Sunshine. You know what I'm going to bring down here next? A can opener. We need one. It's not right to open a can with that rusty axe the way you do. It's not sanitary. But anyway, it'll do for today. Open the peas, Ben." Ben swept into the Merry Sunshine game, had no choice but to comply, and after it got under way, he enjoyed it. First he had to walk off into the chaparral, leaving Virginia with the small fire and a battered saucepan of peas. When he came back, she was cooking them in the role of Merry Sunshine. There, realism ended, and the rest of the Merry Sunshine game consisted of imagination. Details of just pretend value supplemented the historical facts, and eventually 2 imaginary deputy sheriffs with shotguns arrived, and the dramatized Merry Sunshine was restored to the sanctuary of the imaginary bug house. When the game finally ended, the participants, including Wicky, who had played a rather nebulous part, half rat, half child, rested on the sand in front of Ben's shack. "Tomorrow we'll play it again," declared Virginia. "I don't think anything will keep me from coming down tomorrow," and nothing did. But there was a change in the order of events, which precluded any possibility of a repetition of the game. Virginia descended to the arroyo bottom shortly after 4 o'clock, and when she reached Ben's shack, a stranger in a worn-out brown suit was sitting in the broken chair reading a newspaper. She looked at him in amazement. "Where's Ben?" she asked. "Hello," Dean said. He put down the paper and stared at her. Virginia was carrying a can of beans and a can opener. "What have you got there?" "Food." "Where's Ben?" "He's away." "Well, where?" insisted Virginia. "What do you care?" "I want to know. Where's Wiki?" "Who?" "Wiki." "Who's Wiki?" "Our rat." "Oh." Dean gave the cage a glance. "Guess he took it with him." "That was a dumb thing to do. Whose little girl are you?" "I'm Virginia." "Live up there?" Dean indicated the arroyo top by raising his eyebrows. "Yes." "When is Ben coming back?" "Pretty soon." "Let's see the can." Virginia gave him the can of beans and the opener. "Well, that's all right," said Dean, putting the can in his pocket. "Bring some beer next time you come." "I brought that for Ben, not for you," said Virginia. "Nice day if it don't rain," said Dean. "Oh," exclaimed Virginia. "Now I know who you are." "The future," said Dean. "You're Old Man Dean, aren't you?" "Cut out the old man." "Well, this is our arroyo," declared Virginia, "and we don't want it changed." "Think of that. Ben said you thought it was yours." "He did he? But Ben and I have had it for a long time, and we want it to stay the way it is." "Reactionary," said Dean. "What? So you're giving me the works, are you? Well, listen here, little girl. You don't belong down here. If you behave yourself and bring something every time you come, I'll let you keep on comin'. But if you get fresh or smart, I'll warm your bottom until you can't sit on it." "Oh," gasped Virginia, outraged. "Why, you wouldn't dare." "Wouldn't I? I'll tell Daddy." "Maybe I'll tell your daddy that you come sneakin' food down here every day. He'll give you a lickin' himself then." "He would not. So you're going to do like I say, or you're going to get in trouble." Virginia stared at Dean, her amazement mounting into anger. "Is your daddy rich?" asked Dean. "Certainly, he's rich." "What's he do for a living?" "He's a vice president of a bank." "Probably a dirty crook," said Dean. "He is not." Virginia was furious. "Economic parasite," said Dean. "Maybe I'll tell Daddy you called him a parrot-site and a dirty crook. Maybe I will." "Go ahead. He ought to hear it once." "I wish Ben would come back." "Why don't you tell me where Ben went?" "He broke a rule of this arroyo. Now he has to pay for it." "What rule?" "He welched on food and ate a can of peas that didn't belong to him. It belonged to everybody. Now he can't come back until he brings 6 cans back. He's out getting them. That's where he is. If he's not so dumb, he got pinched doing it." "You mean he's stealing them?" "Can't steal something that belongs to all men." "Because Ben wouldn't steal anything. If a man takes a can of peas, you call it stealing. When your daddy's bank takes a man's house away from him, that's capitalism." Go tell that to your daddy. You're just the way Ben said you are. How's that? Kind of mad all the time and crazy. I'll teach him to keep his mouth shut. How many cars has your daddy got? 2. My God, think of that, said Dean, looking at Virginia from head to heel. I suppose he gives you anything you want. Toys, candies, anything. Sure he does. My God, and think of some of the kids I've seen. Why, I know a little girl not much bigger than you in a factory town that has to support her whole family by selling herself on the street. Selling what? Herself. Herself, yeah. Why, how can anybody sell herself? How old are you? Nearly 11. Think it over a few years from now. Is Dean your first name or your last name? Both. Dean. Uh-huh. That's a funny name. Not as good as yours, is it? Oh, it's all right, but it's funny. I suppose you got a private teacher that tells you anybody who hasn't got $1,000,000 is scum for you to spit on. No, I go to public school, Lincoln Avenue. Mother says it's democratic. They were both attracted by the figure of Tex, who came into view along the trail from the north end of the chaparral. He was in a hurry, and as soon as he saw Dean, he began to speak. Heavy's lit out, he called. He's gone. Dean and Virginia stared at him. He's vamoosed, said Tex. Scrammed out. Where did he go? Asked Virginia. Hit the road, said Tex. What do you think of that, Dean? Good thing, said Dean. He was a troublemaker. You know what I think? Asked Tex. I think he was scared of you. Aha, nodded Dean. Heavy was scared of him? Asked Virginia of Tex, pointing toward Dean. And how? Why, I'm not, said Virginia, looking at Dean again. Is Ben? Scared blue, said Tex. They're beginning to get scared of me, too, ain't they, Dean? Keepin' 'em scared gets results, said Dean. Say, Dean, do you think we ought to let Virginia keep comin' down here now that it's the new way? No, I don't, said Dean, staring at Virginia. Go on home, Virginia, commanded Tex. This is Ben's place, said Virginia. You can't send me home. Tycoon's daughter, said Dean to Tex. See? Why, you little hellcat, don't talk back to me, said Tex, frowning. We're particular who we have around here. We are 100% Americans. I'm an American, said Virginia, and I'm going to wait for Ben. Tex looked at Dean. You asked for it, Dean said to him. Look here, said Tex to Virginia. Some people can't come around here, and you're one of 'em. Jews and niggers and you. That's the new way. Now scram. Virginia sat down on the sand beside Ben's shack. You're awfully silly, she said. This is half my arroyo, and if you don't like Jews and Negroes, you shouldn't go around saying so. Maybe they don't like you either. I don't. Dean smothered a laugh. What do you say, Lieutenant? It's a good thing you're a girl, declared Tex, or I'd sock some 100% Americanism into you. Pooh, said Virginia. We had Americanism in school, today. We learned its basic ideal. I bet you don't even know what it is. What is it? Asked Dean. Tolerance, said Virginia. What? Asked Tex. We are having an essay contest on it, said Virginia. The principal explained it to the assembly, and then we all had to say it out loud. Tolerance is the basic ideal of Americanism. The essays have to be 250 to 500 words, and you'll get the prize because your old man's rich," said Dean. "Unless some other kid's old man is richer. God, the crap they teach in schools these days is awful." "I quit before they ever got any of it into me," said Tex. "I got an idea," said Dean, "studying Virginia." "What?" asked Tex. "We're going to play school," said Dean, "and I'm teacher." "I don't think I want to play that," said Virginia. "It's just a game," said Dean. "And to Tex," he added, "when I see a chance to sow a seed, I sow it." "What?" frowned Tex. Dean spoke to Virginia. "You've got a big playhouse up there in your backyard, haven't you?" "Yes," said Virginia. "Well, let's suppose that playhouse of yours is a candy factory." "All right, let's suppose. Now some other little girl comes into your backyard and makes the factory work. You mean my playhouse would make candy?" "That's what I mean," said Dean, leaning forward and looking Virginia in the eyes. "Now you listen to this, and you tell me what you think is fair. Will you do that?" "Sure I will." "All right," said Dean, speaking slowly and deliberately and pausing between his points. "This other little girl, we'll say her name is Mary. Mary comes to your playhouse candy factory, and after a whole day's work, she produces a box of chocolates." "I wish we had some now," said Virginia. Tex sprawled on the sand and listened. "After she produces a box of chocolates," said Dean, "you come home from the movies, where you've been enjoying yourself, and you say, 'Oh, so you made a pound of chocolates, did you? I'll just take the whole pound for myself.' Then Mary will cry because she spent the whole day making that candy, and you'll say, 'Go on and cry, but it's my candy factory, so I own the chocolates.' And maybe, just maybe, mind you, if you feel like it, you might give Mary one little chocolate while you keep the rest of the pound. That is what is called capitalism. That is the result of private ownership of the means of production. Mary does all the work, but because you own the playhouse candy factory, you take all the profit. Mary slaved all day while you looked at Mickey Mouse, but Mary can't have the candy she worked to make. Now is that fair? Would you call that a square deal for Mary?" "No," said Virginia, "it's not fair at all." "Then what would you do if you was Mary?" "Why, that's easy," said Virginia. "If I was Mary, I wouldn't make the candy unless I could have it." "Ha!" Dean looked at Tex with triumph. "That's right. You're a smart little girl. But now listen to this. Suppose Mary simply had to have one piece of candy every day. Suppose that Mary had a stomach that lived on nothing but candy. And I wish I had a stomach like that, don't you, Tex? Yum yum." "Ha!" Tex grunted. "And if Mary didn't get one piece of candy every day," continued Dean, "Mary would die. Then in that case, Mary would have to work the playhouse candy factory for you, even if you took all the chocolates for yourself, and only gave Mary the bare one she needed to live on, wouldn't she?" "I guess she would," said Virginia seriously. "And as for you," said Dean, "you'd have so many chocolates you wouldn't know what to do with 'em. That's democracy under capitalism." "I'd sell 'em," said Virginia. "I'd sell my candy for money." "You see," said Dean to Tex grimly, "there she goes." "What?" asked Virginia. "It's in your blood," said Dean. "You've been conditioned a capitalist." "I'm a capitalist," said Virginia, rolling the word with her tongue. Capitalist. I'm a capitalist, capitalist, capitalist. What are you, Dean? 100% American. What's Tex? Same. What's Ben? Same. But he don't know it. So's Gosh, and he's dumber yet. So's anybody who wants to overthrow the abuses of the system. What's Daddy? He's a lousy capitalist. He does just what you do. He makes other people do the work, and he squeezes the lifeblood out of 'em and eats it. Oh, he does not. He ought to get 10 years in a concentration camp, said Dean. All say, agreed Tex. Daddy says anybody who wants to overthrow the government should be deported. Hear that? Dean asked Tex with satisfaction. Already teaching their kids to persecute us. Well, they're not going to get away with it. Boy, the day is comin' when we'll make that French Revolution look like a Sunday school picnic. Atta stuff, said Tex. Now sometime when your daddy is sittin' around thinkin' what small depositor or farmer or homeowner his bank can squeeze to the wall next, you tell him the story of Mary and the candy factory. Will you do that? All right. And if he tells you it ain't so, don't you believe him. His guts knows it's so, even if his brain won't admit it. His guts knows it, that is, if he's got any guts. He's got plenty of guts, declared Virginia. What are guts? Insides, said Tex. Here comes Ben, said Virginia. She jumped up. Ben, he's sitting on your chair. She pointed at Dean. Have you got Wiki with you, Ben? Ben walked up to his shack. He patted Virginia and spoke to Dean. I got 4 cans. I told you 6, said Dean. Just wasn't no way to get 6, protested Ben. Can't go walking out of a market with your pockets full so that anybody'd notice it. Listen, stupid, said Dean. Walk into a market and take anything little. Take yeast cakes. Put 'em in your pants pockets. Ask the clerk for something he hasn't got. Then walk out. Go to the next nearest market. Tell the clerk you bought 8 yeast cakes that morning and you don't need that many, and you're bringing 4 back. He gives you a dime for 'em. Go back to the first market and load your clothes with small cans. Buy 1 dime's worth of anything. Joke with the clerk and walk out. It's done every day. Nothing dishonest in cheatin' a chain store. You don't need brains. Now give me them cans. Boy, that's slick, said Tex. That's nothin', said Dean. Some day I'll show you how to shake down a filling station. I got a system that'll take any one of 'em. All you need is a phony ignition key. Only thing to look out for is that the filling station mustn't be near a garage with a tow car. You're supposed to be looking for a garage with a tow car, see? That's your first line. You work this at night. Yeah, then what? Asked Tex. You tell the guy your car's broke down 2 blocks away. Then you find you left your money in it. You show the guy your ignition key, see? Then you borrow a dime from him in order to telephone for a tow car. And as soon as you... Wait a minute. Dean stopped and stared at Virginia. What are you listening to all this for? Going to go tell your daddy? You sound like the crooks Dick Tracy catches, said Virginia. Look here, said Dean to Ben. Chase your girlfriend home. We don't want her here now. I'm not going home. We have to feed Wiki. This is our place. I can stay here, can't I, Ben? Well, Virginia, Ben hesitated. It's like this today. He took her by the hand, and they walked toward the trail. Let's walk along a little. Do you really call a tow car? Tex was asking Dean. I don't like that, Dean. Ben, said Virginia. Why, don't you make him stay away from our place. He spoils it all. We'll see, said Ben softly, as they walked along. Today, you better go back up to your house. I'll walk a little spell with you. Where's Wiki? Virginia was walking ahead of Ben along the trail. He's in my shirt. He don't like those fellows any more'n you do. They passed Gosh's house. He was there, and he stared at them and waved a feeble greeting. I kinda think, said Ben slowly, that maybe you better stay up at your house for a couple of days, until we see how things works out. Oh, but Ben, I want to come and see you. I know, said Ben. Tell you what, tomorrow I'll come to where the streetcar ends, and we can walk along from there. All right, Ben. I'll watch for you when I get off the car. They came to the point where the trail went up the cliff. That'll be nice. You walk up to the arroyo top now. Virginia started up the trail. Good night, Ben. He watched her as she ascended. A quarter of the way up she called down. He took your beans and the can opener. Ben nodded and waved her on. He stood looking up until she disappeared over the rim. Well, sighed Ben, as he turned back toward his shack. It looks like Arizona, young fellow, he said to his shirt front. Virginia walked through the garden and entered the house by the back door. Mumbled Celia. If your mother ain't looking for you, you're gonna catch it, and you better tell the truth, too. Virginia looked at the brown face in surprise, sitting in the kitchen. In a maid's uniform, waiting to serve, was Lizzie, Celia's niece. That meant there were guests for dinner. They never had Lizzie just for themselves. There must be a dinner party. What happened? Asked Virginia. Lizzie laughed. Deep, mellifluous laughter, way down in her throat. I been hearin' tales about you, she chuckled. My, tramps and rats. I know who's been takin' things out of my kitchen, said Celia. Go on along now. Miss Stewart'll take care of you. Virginia walked through the house, but Mother and Daddy were in the library, and she could hear Mother saying, Celia thought the delivery boys were doing it, but it seems she's been taking food down there every day to feed this tramp. Then Daddy said, Harmon said he saw her way out on the golf course. The tramp doesn't play golf, does he? This is nothing to joke about. I haven't any idea how long it's been going on, said Mother exasperated, and by the grace of God we've discovered it before it's too late. Celia says she thinks he's an old man, but even so you can't tell what he might do to her. A dirty tramp and a filthy rat. Ugh! That's what Harmon asked me, said Daddy. He said she was covered with mud, and asked him if he had her rat. When did he see her? Asked Mother. Several days ago, last Friday, I think he said. Do you suppose that is why we haven't heard from them lately? Do you suppose she was rude to him, or said anything? "I hardly think so," said Daddy. He was kidding about it, but I could see that he was surprised. Of course, I didn't know what he was talking about. "Well, if she's down there, I suppose I'd better go get her." "At once," said Mother. Virginia walked the few remaining steps toward the library. Mother and Daddy weren't understanding, and possibly it was too late to make them see, but it was all up now, and it might as well come out. There were only 3 more steps to the library, but they were hard to take. 1, 2, 3. Virginia said, "Mother, I'm surprised." "We don't know what to think of you, Virginia," said Daddy sternly. "After you promised, Mother, you wouldn't go down to the arroyo ever again. And now we find that you've been taking food and behaving disgracefully and seeing a horrible tramp and that disgusting rat." Mother shuddered. "You've never been punished, Virginia," said Daddy. "You've always had everything you wanted. Mother and I are very, very ashamed of the way you've acted." "You never deceived Daddy and me before," said Mother. "And now you've told lies," said Daddy. "You've broken your word, you've stolen food, and you've done all those things knowing they were wrong, and you would have kept on doing them if Mother and I hadn't found out." "Now what have you to say for yourself?" asked Mother. Virginia took a short breath. It was such a dreadful moment. She bit her lip, and her eyes looked through a film. It was the way Mother and Daddy felt that was what cut deeper. Something way down inside you hurt, because they were so hurt and disappointed and couldn't understand about Ben and Wiki. She had surprised and wounded them by doing something they never thought she would do. She hadn't been the little girl they thought she was, and they couldn't understand it, and everything they said was true, every word of it, but it wasn't really the way they thought it was. She wasn't really bad. It hadn't really been telling lies. It wasn't done to deceive. It was all different. Now they must be told the part that was different, somehow. "I didn't mean," she began and choked. "I only went down there because it didn't seem to be bad. I didn't do it because, She gulped and swallowed. "Why didn't you tell Mother?" asked Daddy, "if there was nothing wrong about it. Why did you deceive Mother?" "I didn't want to keep it from Mother," she said weakly. "I mean, I had to go, not to be bad, but—" She caught her breath, and tears began to flow, and she turned to Mother. But Mother didn't welcome her. She was apathetic, and said coldly, "Tears are not enough. You've been a very bad, deceitful girl. Mother doesn't want to touch you." Through her sobs, she heard Daddy say, "I think she'd better go upstairs. It's obvious we're not going to get anything out of her." "It's 6, said Mother. "The Newmans will be here at 6:30, and you have to dress. The McLeans may be a little late, and we won't wait cocktails." "Mother," sobbed Virginia. "Mother, I didn't want to." "There's no use in trying to talk to Mother now. You'd better go upstairs, Virginia," Daddy said. "We'll try to sift through this later. Celia can give her dinner in her room," Mother said. "She won't be in any condition to see people. Goodness knows, maybe Jack Newman saw her wallowing in mud and playing with a tramp. I don't know what kind of parents people will think we are." "Virginia," said Daddy, "I told you to go upstairs." "Go into the bathroom," said Mother, "and wash thoroughly before you touch anything. Ugh." Virginia turned from the library, the world in a blur. Gasping through her sobs, she went up to her room. The very worst had happened. If only she had told them sooner. But there was no way to tell them. There never had been any way to tell them. It just had to keep on going as it did until it crashed. And that Mr. Harmon, that fat jello Mr. Harmon, he was responsible for all this. But even he couldn't have known about Ben. He only knew about Wiki. And unless Celia suspected, how could they have found out as much as they had? She found a handkerchief, and dried her eyes, and blew her nose, and then, on her desk, she saw the further incriminating evidence, which Mother must have found, and read, the theme for English composition, written 3 weeks ago. Virginia Stewart, English, 7th grade, The Pet Rat. There are children who have pet dogs, and there are other children who have pet cats. There are children who have goldfish in their homes, and there are unfortunate children who have no pets at all. I have a pet rat. That is, I have half a pet rat, and my friend Ben has the other half. He is brown and has long whiskers and ears and likes to gnaw things. His name is Wiki, because that is short for whiskers. He lives with Ben in a cage in the arroyo bottom, and sometimes he can come out and walk all over. He likes cheese and bread and meat and honey and canned fish and vitals and almost anything he can eat. He can do tricks for his food, but if the trick is spoiled, he can't make up his mind what to do. Then he just lies around. He won't even eat then. He has a headache and needs an aspirin. It is because he is up against an indissoluble problem. Human beings are like rats, Ben says. One time, when our rat couldn't get honey out of a bottle, Ben taught him to get it out by dipping his tail and licking it. This shows that there is always an answer to every problem if you know enough. His fur is not soft, but he is very smart just the same. He can go around inside Ben's shirt. Anyway, a rat's fur is not supposed to be soft. He likes to run fast on the wire thing inside his cage. But best of all, he likes cheese. I am very fond of my rat, and I go down to see him and Ben every day. There it lay in all its painful details, with the ironic grade A written in Material Difference's hand. Mother was at the door. "Have you washed yourself?" "Not yet, Mother." "Virginia, you go straight into the bathroom and wash that filth off yourself. If you try Mother's patience any more, I shall have to punish you, and punish you severely." Virginia hastened to obey. When she returned to her room, Mother told her to undress and go to bed, and Celia would bring her dinner up on a tray. "I'm not punishing you by sending you to bed," Mother explained. "We're having guests for dinner, and Daddy and I want you to stay in your room. Tomorrow we'll talk this whole thing over. Just now you can think about how you've hurt Mother and Daddy, if you care at all." With that, Mother went out of the room and closed the door. Slowly Virginia undressed and got into bed. After some time she could hear voices downstairs, several voices at once, and laughter, and the chinkle-chinkle noise that the cocktail shaker made when Daddy shook it. More voices, more talk. She thought of Ben and Wiki and Heavy on the road somewhere, and that fresh red-headed Tex, and funny little Gosh, and that perfectly nasty Dean. But most of all she thought of Ben. He was thinking of her right now, most likely. It would be nice if he'd come up and whistle tonight, the way he had when Wiki had been found. But he wouldn't because there was no reason for it. Ben couldn't know that she was unhappy. About 7:30, Celia came in with her dinner on a tray. She knew that Celia was pleased, because it had all come out. She really didn't like Celia. "Here's a good dinner for a real bad girl," said Celia. Virginia didn't answer. Celia wasn't an ally or even a friend. Celia probably would have been pleased if Mother had punished her. She accepted the tray and said nothing, and Celia left the room. Virginia ate her dinner and put the tray on the floor. She reached across to the table beside her bed and found a pencil and some paper. She had one good friend, anyway, and he loved her. She could write him and tell him about how nobody understood. "Dear Ben," she wrote. Then it was impossible to go on. She couldn't explain it all to Ben after all. Just, "Dear Ben," that was enough. It looked nice on the page. She repeated it 6 times. It was nice, just to write that much. Well, it was too early to go to sleep. She might as well make some use of the pencil and paper. What homework was there to be done? Arithmetic? No, the essay contest. She could work on that, and maybe this theme wouldn't get her in the trouble that the one called the pet rat had done. Sitting up in bed, she wrote laboriously on the upper right-hand corner of the paper, "Virginia Stewart, English, 7th grade." She thought for a moment about how to begin. Then slowly she wrote, "Tolerance is the basic ideal of Americanism."